Billionaire catches maid's daughter studying in the parking lot, and this happens. The silence in Montenegro Corpus's underground parking garage was almost sacred, a crypt of concrete and steel where the air smelled of ozone, expensive rubber, and the metallic chill of power. Massive columns, painted with gold numbers, stood like silent sentinels, guarding a harem of luxury vehicles that gleamed under the cold, sterile lighting. Each car there was worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. In that basement, the outside world, with its noise, dust, and imperfections, simply didn't exist. It was a sterile sanctuary, the first step of the corporate Olympus that rose 50 stories above. The high-pitched hum of a high-performance electric motor cut through the silence. The Obsidian, a luxury sedan that resembled a spaceship, glided into the private parking space marked CEO in bold letters. The door opened with a pneumatic sigh, and Arthur Montenegro emerged. At 52, he was the embodiment of his empire, a graphite-gray Italian suit tailored with surgical precision, leather shoes that reflected the overhead lights like black mirrors, and a face sculpted by years of ruthless decision-making. There was a weariness in his shoulders, but his icy blue eyes still scanned the room with predatory authority, searching for anything out of place. And he found her. In a forgotten corner, near a rarely used service exit, an anomaly disturbed the perfect symmetry of his domain. A small, hunched figure sat on the concrete floor beside a pillar. A dim, yellowish light from a small, battery-powered lamp created an intimate circle of illumination amid the gloom. At first, Arthur felt a twinge of irritation. An intruder? A beggar who had somehow bypassed the building's multi-million-dollar security? The disorder offended him on a visceral level. He walked toward it, his footsteps echoing like hammer blows in the oppressive silence. With each step, his jaw tightened. Someone would pay for this failure. As he approached, he saw it was a girl, young, maybe 20. She wore a faded sweatshirt and worn jeans. She was so absorbed in the thick book resting on her lap that she didn't notice his approach. Around her, a small fortress of knowledge, more books stacked high, notebooks filled with dense notes, and a thermos. He stood before her, an imposing shadow that finally eclipsed her small source of light. Sofia Alves looked up, startled. The light from the lamp cast the man's face in harsh shadows, accentuating the contemptuous line around his mouth. She recognized him instantly. She'd seen that face in the newspapers, on TV, and occasionally, in passing, when he passed her mother in the mansion, as if she were part of the furniture. It was Mr. Montenegro, the owner of it all. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear and shame. "What do you think you're doing here?" His voice was low, but carried the weight of someone unaccustomed to being disobeyed. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Sophia flinched, instinctively closing the book, as if protecting something precious. I'm sorry, sir. I was just studying." Her voice was a thread, barely audible. Arthur glanced at the book's cover, a complex title about quantum mechanics, and let out a dry, disdainful laugh. "Studying? Here? This is private property, not a public library for people like you." The term "people like you" hung in the cold air, an invisible, cutting barrier between the two worlds colliding at that moment. "My mother is Elena," she said, as if the name were a pass, an explanation. "Elena Alves. She works for you. I only get rides from her. My apartment is noisy, and the library closes early." The mention of Elena didn't soften Arthur's expression, it just transformed it. His disdain for an anonymous intruder turned into a familiar, almost patronizing disdain. "Ah, Elena's daughter." He eyed her makeshift surroundings with barely concealed disgust. "And what better place for this? Does your mother know you're here, among the cars?" Each word was a small humiliation, a sharp reminder of her place in the world. Sophia felt her face burn. She thought of her small apartment, where she shared a room with her younger sister, the sound of the neighbor's television filtering through the thin walls. She thought of her mother's sacrifice, working 2 jobs so she could dream of a college that seemed a universe away. That cold, silent garage was her only refuge, her only portal to a different future. But to this man, it was just dirt on his immaculate carpet. "I'm not bothering anyone, sir. I'm staying quiet in my corner," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Your corner?" he repeated, savoring the irony. "This corner is worth more than the house you live in. Go home, girl, and I don't want to see you here anymore." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked toward the private elevator, the sound of his expensive shoes receding. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket, probably to scold the security chief. Sophia stood there motionless, the echo of his words echoing off the concrete. The cold she felt now no longer came from the ground, but from within. She looked at her books, at the equations that had once seemed like promises of an orderly and just universe. Now, they seemed like useless scribbles. With trembling hands, she opened the book again and from within pulled out a worn photo, bent at the corners. It was her, younger, standing next to her mother. Elena smiled, her eyes tired but filled with fierce pride. "You will fly higher than them all, my daughter," her mother always said. Sophia clutched the photo tightly, humiliation slowly turning into an ember of determination. He might own this ground, but he would never own the sky she was determined to reach. The week that followed the parking lot encounter was a tense silence. Elena Alves moved around the Montenegro mansion with suppressed anxiety, polishing already gleaming surfaces and avoiding her boss's gaze. Sophia, meanwhile, was banished from her concrete refuge. She tried studying in parks, in noisy cafes where a cup of coffee was the rent for 2 hours of peace. But concentration was a shy butterfly, impossible to capture. The humiliation she had suffered still burned beneath her skin, an invisible wound that throbbed to the rhythm of a feverish determination. Arthur Montenegro's arrogance had not broken her. On the contrary, it forged her purpose with stronger steel. The stage for the next collision was set on a Friday night. Arthur Montenegro was hosting an intimate dinner at his mansion, a fortress of glass and white marble overlooking the glittering city. Intimate, in Arthur's vocabulary, meant 30 of the richest and most influential people in the country. They were corporate sharks, investors with insatiable appetites, and executives who talked about mergers and acquisitions as if they were playing a chess game with the fate of thousands of people at stake. The air was thin, perfumed with the scent of white lilies and success. Elena was in the kitchen, directing the hired catering team, her face a mask of professionalism that hid the nervousness of serving lions. Sophia was there to help. It was an important night. The extra pay would make a difference in the month's tight budget. Her task was simple: help clear the empty bowls, be quick, efficient, and above all, invisible. She moved through the cracks of opulence, a silent shadow with a silver tray in her hand. She heard fragments of conversation that seemed to come from another planet. Yachts in Monaco, hostile takeovers, a Swiss artist's new collection. Each crystal glass she picked up seemed to mock her calloused hands. The collective contempt wasn't overt. It was something deeper, more passive. It was complete and utter indifference. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a function, an anonymous cog in the machinery that made their lives perfect and effortless. She felt like a ghost, and she craved it. Invisibility was her armor. The armor, however, shattered when Arthur Montenegro's voice cut through the din of conversation. He stood in the center of the main living room, a monumental fireplace framing his figure. Beside him was Ricardo Vargas, his vice president of operations, a younger man with a predatory smile and calculating eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, and an immediate silence fell. "We've spoken tonight about challenges, about overcoming the impossible. And that reminds me of a curious lesson in ambition I witnessed recently." Sophia froze halfway to the kitchen, a half-empty champagne glass on her tray. A chilling foreboding ran down her spine. She saw Arthur's gaze sweep across the room and land squarely on her. Her heart sank. "We have among us," he continued, a condescending smile forming on his lips, "a young woman with admirable aspirations. The daughter of my esteemed governess, Elena." He gestured broadly toward Sophia. "I ran into her the other day, studying quantum physics in my parking lot. Can you imagine?" 30 pairs of eyes turned to her. Suddenly, she was no longer invisible. She was the center of a cruel, inexplicable spotlight. The murmur that spread through the room was a wave of curiosity and derision. Sophia could feel the heat rising up her neck, the blood pounding in her ears. Across the room, she saw her mother in the kitchen doorway, her face pale as wax, her eyes wide with sheer terror. Ricardo Vargas laughed, a sound calculated to please his boss. "Careful, Arthur. With so much knowledge, she might end up wanting your job." The joke was met with polite but sharp laughter. Each laugh was a small stiletto piercing Sophia's dignity. "Exactly, Ricardo. Ambition is a virtue, but ambition without a sense of reality is a dangerous fantasy," Arthur said, his tone becoming falsely professorial. He walked slowly toward Sophia, who stood frozen, the tray trembling in her hands. "So, I've decided to propose a little experiment, an object lesson." He stood in front of her, so close she could smell the expensive scent of his cologne. He took an ultra-thin tablet from an aide's hand. The screen glowed with complex graphics and lines of code that resembled hieroglyphics. "As some of you know," Arthur said, now addressing his guests, but keeping his eyes fixed on Sophia, "Montenegro Corp is on the verge of launching Project Orion, our new network of communication satellites. However, we've hit a snag. A tiny but persistent problem in the trajectory correction algorithm. A bug that has cost millions in delays and that a team of top engineers from MIT, Caltech, and Stanford have been unable to isolate." The tension in the room became palpable. He was exposing a weakness in the company, something he would never do without a much greater purpose. That purpose, Sophia realized with growing horror, was her. He held out the tablet to her. "Here it is, all the data, the entirety of our standoff." Sophia stared at the screen. It was an ocean of indecipherable information, a mountain of collective genius where a single flaw lurked. It was the most impossible task she could imagine. "Here's my proposal, little parking genius." Arthur's voice was a soft venom. "I give you until the board meeting next Friday. 7 days. If you, with your books and your enthusiasm, can find the flaw in our thinking, if you can even point to a new direction our doctors haven't seen, I will not only fund your full education at the university of your choice, anywhere in the world." He paused dramatically. "I will give you a leadership position in Project Orion as soon as you graduate." A collective gasp ran through the room. The offer was so extravagant, so absurd, that it could only be a farce. It was a spectacle of power, the ultimate demonstration that he could afford to toy with a person's dreams. The humiliation lay in the enormity of the impossible offer. Ricardo Vargas added the final blow. "But if it fails," he said with a false tone of concern, "it will be proof that some people must be content with their place in the world. It would be a shame to waste so much effort on fantasies, wouldn't it?" The veiled threat was clear. The public humiliation of her failure would be the punishment for her audacity. She looked at Arthur Montenegro's face and saw the gleam of sadistic triumph. He expected her to refuse, to bow her head, to cry. He wanted to crush her there, in front of everyone, to reaffirm the natural order of his universe. She looked at her mother, who was shaking her head subtly, her eyes imploring her not to accept, to end this torture. But then something inside Sophia shifted. Shame and fear crystallized into a cold, lucid rage. They saw her as an insect, an object for their amusement. In that moment, she realized that dignity lay not in retreating into the invisibility they had destined for her, but in accepting the impossible challenge they had laid at her feet. It was a 1 in a billion chance, but it was a chance. She lifted her chin, looked Arthur Montenegro directly in the eyes, and in the firmest voice she could muster, a voice that cut through the silence of the room, she said, "I accept the challenge, Mr. Montenegro." She took the tablet from his hand. For a moment Arthur's smile faltered, surprised by her unexpected response. Then he composed himself, laughing as if she'd told the best joke of all. The room followed suit, a wave of condescending laughter that crashed against Sophia but didn't knock her down. She turned, not waiting to be dismissed, and walked out of the room, head held high, holding the tablet like a weapon. Collective scorn followed her, but for the first time she felt she had the power to turn it into fuel. The first 3 days were a plunge into a dark, icy ocean. Sophia transformed her small bedroom into a chaotic command center. The walls were covered with sheets of paper printed with flowcharts, frequency spectrums, and blocks of code that resembled an alien language. The tablet Arthur Montenegro had given her was a portal to the labyrinth. With each layer of data she uncovered, she found 10 more complex and interconnected. It was a 1,000-headed monster, designed by brilliant minds, and she felt like a child trying to fight a titan with a tree branch. The weight of the contempt she felt in that luxurious living room returned in waves, whispering in her ear that she was a fraud, a fool who had taken a cruel bait. Sleep became a luxury she could not afford. Her diet consisted of strong coffee and whatever her mother, Elena, forced her to eat. Elena watched her daughter's transformation with a heavy heart. She saw the burning genius in Sophia's eyes, but she also saw the abyss that consumed her. Each night, she found her daughter asleep on a stack of papers, her face etched with exhaustion. "Daughter, please," she whispered on the third night, her voice breaking, as she placed a blanket over Sophia's shoulders. "This is torture. It's not a challenge. It's a punishment. That man, he wants to break you. Don't let him." Sophia, semi-conscious, simply squeezed her mother's hand. "I have to do this, Mother. Not for him. For us." The answer, though weak, carried a conviction that silenced Elena's fears, transforming them into fierce, unconditional support. From that moment on, Elena became the guardian of the journey, the silent sentinel ensuring the outside world did not interfere in her daughter's battle. Meanwhile, in the Montenegro Corp Tower, Ricardo Vargas observed the situation with amusement that gradually gave way to irritation. Arthur's experiment should have ended within 24 hours, with the girl returning the tablet in tears. The fact that she persisted was an irritating anomaly. He couldn't allow her, by some cosmic fluke, to stumble upon something that would make Arthur look like a visionary, and he, the vice president, look incompetent. The sabotage would be subtle. He instructed one of his IT managers to verify data integrity on the server to which Sophia's tablet was connected. On Wednesday, just as Sophia was beginning to follow a promising path, a crucial set of historical telemetry data was corrupted, replaced with empty files. For Sophia, it was a devastating blow. Hours of work had come to nothing. The trail she'd followed ended in a cliff. Frustration flooded her, and for the first time, hot tears of despair streamed down her face. This was it. It was the end. They had won. She threw herself on the bed, her body shaking with exhaustion and defeat. But as she lay there, staring blankly at the ceiling, her mind wandered away from the code and algorithms. It wandered to the stars. She remembered her father. He wasn't a scientist, just a mechanic with the soul of a poet and the mind of an astronomer. He didn't own an expensive telescope, but he'd built one with lenses he'd bought at a junkyard. He didn't see the stars as data points. He saw them as music, as a dance of invisible forces. "Never trust the numbers alone, Sophia," he used to say, pointing to the night sky. "Numbers are the language we use to describe the dance. But the dance is everything. Feel the physics." That memory was the spark. She stood, wiped her tears, and went to an old wooden box under the bed. Inside were her father's notebooks, tattered notebooks, filled not just with equations, but with drawings, with philosophical analogies about the cosmos. She was approaching the problem like the engineers at Montenegro Corp, as a programming error. But what if it wasn't? What if the error lay in the music itself? What if their mathematical model, sophisticated as it was, wasn't accurately describing the dance of the universe? Ricardo's sabotage, by forcing her to abandon the data, forced her to abandon the conventional path. It was the obstacle that set her on the right track. That same day, an unexpected turn of events occurred. An anonymous email appeared in his inbox. The address was a jumble of letters and numbers. The message was short. "They're looking at orbital resonances in a double-body system. They're wrong. It's a three-body problem. The moon has an anomalous wobble. Look for the eccentric Hill effect. No one ever listens to me. Good luck." Attached was a single scientific paper, an obscure 20-year-old publication by a Russian astrophysicist. The message was from Leo, a young data analyst at Project Orion. He was a quiet genius, crushed by bureaucracy and the arrogance of his superiors. He had hypothesized the lunar wobble months earlier, but was ridiculed in a meeting for overcomplicating the problem. Upon hearing about Arthur's challenge, he saw a chance, not for himself, but for the truth. He sent the email like a message in a bottle, a desperate bet on the girl in the parking lot. For Sophia, Leo's message was the key that unlocked the universe. The eccentric Hill effect was exactly what her father's notebooks poetically described, a tiny but constant disturbance that standard models ignored because it was considered statistically insignificant. The engineers at Montenegro Corp, with their multi-million-dollar tools, were trying to fix a car's engine without realizing that the road it was traveling on was subtly curved. The flaw wasn't in the code. It was in the premise. The software was perfect. The map of the universe it was using was wrong. The last 3 days were a frantic race against time. Sophia was no longer looking for a mistake. She was building a new truth. Using the old computer her father had assembled piece by piece, she worked day and night. The Russian paper gave her the theoretical framework, her father's notebooks gave her the intuition, and her own brilliant mind put it all together. She no longer needed the corrupted telemetry data. She built a new predictive model from scratch, a model that accounted for that tiny, crucial wobble. Code flowed from her fingers, no longer like an alien language, but like her native tongue. She wrote simulations, and they worked. One after another, the anomalies that plagued Project Orion disappeared, replaced by clean, perfect trajectories. In a brief scene in the corporate tower, Arthur asked Ricardo about the experiment. "Any news on our little genius?" he scoffed. "She gave up, as expected," Ricardo replied confidently. "The tablet hasn't accessed our servers in 2 days. Silence is the confession of failure." Arthur nodded, satisfied. The matter was closed. On Friday morning, Sophia's room was quiet. Elena entered hesitantly and found her sitting in front of her computer screen. On the screen, a single sentence glowed green. "Simulation complete. Margin of error. 0.01%. Beside it, a finished file. The Orion solution. Sophia turned to her mother. Her eyes were red with exhaustion, but they shone with a light Elena had never seen before. It wasn't the light of hope. It was the light of certainty. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer the frightened girl from the parking lot. She was the only person on the planet who knew how to make Arthur Montenegro's satellites dance in the correct harmony. She got up, grabbed her tablet, and connected it to her computer, transferring the file. The journey in the dark was over. Now it was time to show them the light. Montenegro Corp's boardroom was a pantheon atop Olympus. Located on the top floor, it was an aquarium of glass and power suspended above the city. A single black obsidian table, polished like a mirror, spanned the room, reflecting the gray sky outside. The 12 high-backed leather chairs were thrones, and the men who occupied them were the titans who pulled the invisible strings of the economy. At the center of the table, Arthur Montenegro presided, not as an equal, but as Zeus in his domain. Ricardo Vargas sat to his right, a smile of mischievous anticipation on his lips. In the frigid air conditioning, there was a heavy, expectant silence. They weren't there for a presentation. They were there for the final execution of a joke. The door opened with a soft click, and Sophia entered. She wore dark jeans and a simple white blouse, the most formal outfit she owned. In her hands, she held her old laptop, covered in space mission stickers, an otherworldly artifact in that sterile environment. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, and there were deep circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady. She looked like a child who had stumbled into a meeting of heads of state. The council members eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. One of them glanced pointedly at his platinum watch. "Ah, here she is," Arthur said, his voice resonating with false cordiality. "Gentlemen, as promised, a brief interlude before our main topic. This is Miss Sophia Alves, the young prodigy who graciously accepted our educational challenge." The term educational was pronounced with an emphasis that made it clear to whom the lesson was intended. Sophia walked to the head of the table, facing the gigantic screen that took up the entire wall. She felt dozens of eyes boring into her, judging her clothes, her age, her presence. The ghost of the humiliated girl in the parking lot tried to take hold of her, but she pushed it to the back of her mind. "Thank you, Mr. Montenegro," she said, her voice clear and unshaken. "Shall we begin?" Her unexpected confidence caused a slight surprise. Ricardo Vargas leaned forward, his smile turning into a subtle snarl. "Of course, Ms. Alves, we're all eager to see the magic. But first, a technical question. Could you show us your regression analysis of the gamma quadrant telemetry data for the last 48 hours? We noticed your access to our servers abruptly ceased. Is there a problem?" It was a trap. An impossible question based on data he himself had corrupted and designed to expose her as an amateur who had given up halfway. The other executives shifted in their chairs, smelling blood in the water. This would be the swift and humiliating end they had been waiting for. The moment of doubt hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sophia seemed trapped, her face pale under the cold lights. She looked as if she would stammer, apologize, and flee. Arthur started to stand, ready for the coup de grace. "Well, I believe that answers our—" "No, it doesn't answer." Sophia's interruption was so sudden and sharp that Arthur sat back down, shocked. A deathly silence fell over the room. Sophia looked up from her laptop and directly at Ricardo Vargas. The fear on her face was gone, replaced by cold, implacable authority. "With all due respect, Mr. Vargas, you're asking the wrong question. In fact, you've all spent the last 6 months asking the wrong questions." She turned and connected her laptop to the projector. The Montenegro Corp. Screen flickered, replaced not by graphs and code, but by a familiar, elegant image, planet Earth and its moon, slowly rotating in the black velvet of space. The board members frowned in confusion. "You treated Project Orion like a software problem," she continued, her voice now resonating with a teacher's passion. "You looked for a bug, a faulty line of code. But the fault was never in the code. The fault is in your physics." She started the animation. A yellow line representing a satellite's orbit appeared around Earth. "Your model is based on a double-body system, treating the moon's gravitational pull as a perfectly spherical constant. But it isn't. The moon has a slight but crucial wobble on its axis, an anomaly known as the eccentric Hill effect." As she spoke, the moon's orbit in her animation began to wobble subtly. The satellite's yellow line, previously stable, began to show small but increasing perturbations with each pass. "These perturbations," she said, "are like pushing a swing at the wrong pace. Most pushes do nothing, but every now and then you hit a resonant frequency and the result is catastrophic. You weren't fighting a bug, you were fighting the universe itself." The technical jargon disappeared, replaced by a stunning clarity that everyone in the room could understand. Ricardo Vargas tried to interrupt. "That's theoretical nonsense. It's not theoretical," Sophia snapped. She pressed a key. The screen split. On the left side, the Montenegro Corp simulation appeared, with the satellite's trajectory becoming erratic and a red warning light flashing. "This is your model, running with your data." On the right side, a second simulation appeared. The satellite's trajectory was perfect, a clean, precise line. "And this is mine. I didn't need your telemetry data, Mr. Vargas, because they were recording the symptoms. I went after the disease. I built a new predictive model from scratch." A murmur of disbelief ran through the room. Dr. Albright, the project's chief engineer, a gray-haired man who had remained silent until then, leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen, his mouth slightly open. Sophia then delivered the final blow, the undisputed victory. "You classified the Orion 3 satellite incident on April 27th as an unexplained hardware failure that cost $87 million in repairs and relocation," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She typed a date into her computer. The simulation on the right-hand side advanced in time, stopping at April 27th. A specific point in the satellite's orbit began flashing bright red. At 4:32 a.m., Greenwich Mean Time, Orion 3 passed through a hill resonance zone that your model did not predict. This caused an overload of its stabilizing gyros. It was not a hardware failure. It was a prediction failure. My model predicted this event to within 17 seconds. The silence in the room was now so profound it felt like a vacuum. Arthur Montenegro was pale, his face a mask of shock. Ricardo Vargas stared at the screen as if he'd seen a ghost. He hadn't just been refuted. He'd been dismantled, his arrogance exposed as ignorance in front of the entire council. Finally, one of the council's most senior members, a man named Mr. Ishikawa, known for his sharp mind and few words, broke the silence. He didn't look at Sophia. He turned to Dr. Albright. His voice was sharp as broken glass. "Check, now." Dr. Albright, along with two other engineers, scrambled to his feet and ran to a terminal in the corner of the room, their fingers flying over the keyboard. Everyone's attention was now divided between the screen displaying Sophia's irrefutable proof and the engineers frantically trying to prove her wrong. But their increasingly pale faces already told the story. Sophia remained in her seat, silent. She didn't need to say anything else. She had entered that room as the maid's daughter. But in that moment, as the titans of industry regarded her with a new kind of respect, mixed with fear and admiration, she was the most powerful person there. The frantic sound of the engineers typing ceased. Dr. Albright, his face pale and covered in a cold sweat, slowly turned to the obsidian desk. His eyes met not Arthur's, but Sophia's. In his gaze, there was an admiration bordering on reverence. "She's right," he said, his voice hoarse, breaking the sepulchral silence. "Every word. Her simulation is perfect. The model is revolutionary." The confirmation fell upon the room like a judge's anvil. There was no longer room for doubt, only for consequences. Ricardo Vargas sank into his chair, his face gray with defeat. Arthur Montenegro remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on nothing, seeing not the city through the window, but the rubble of his own arrogance. Finally, he stood. "The meeting is adjourned," he said, his voice devoid of its usual authority. "Everyone, please leave me alone with Miss Alves." When the room emptied, leaving only the two of them, Arthur didn't speak. He walked to the window, surveying the empire he'd built. "I owe you more than a university," he said, without turning around. "I owe you an apology. What I did, the bet, the humiliation, was an act of unforgivable cruelty." He finally turned to her, and for the first time, Sophia didn't see the billionaire or the tyrant. She saw a man confronting his own moral bankruptcy. "The truth is, I didn't see you." I looked at you and saw a stereotype, a social class. I didn't see the brilliant mind that was right in front of me all along. I was blind. Arthur's true change wasn't sealed there, in that glass tower, but the following night. He drove his driverless car to the modest neighborhood where Sophia and Elena lived. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs of the simple building and knocked on the door of the small apartment. When Elena opened it and saw him, she was speechless. He asked to come in. In the simple but impeccably tidy living room, Arthur Montenegro, the man she had served silently for 20 years, begged for forgiveness. He apologized not only to Sophia for his arrogance, but to Elena for years of indifference, for never asking about her dreams or the brilliant daughter she was raising. He kept his promise, offering Sophia an unlimited scholarship, but he went further. "I don't want to just pay for your education," he said. "I want to learn from you. Montenegro Corp needs a revolution. I want you to lead it. Create a new research and development department with complete autonomy, a place for minds like yours who don't fit our mold." Sophia's victory was as dignified as her struggle. She accepted the apology and the offer, but on her own terms. She founded the Perspectiva Division, an innovation lab focused on solving problems from unconventional angles. Her first hire was Leo, the analyst who had sent her the anonymous email, who flourished under her leadership. Ricardo Vargas was summarily fired, a symbol of the old culture that Arthur now strived to eradicate. The story of the parking lot girl who saved Project Orion leaked, becoming an inspiring legend in the tech world. Sophia, however, turned down offers from Harvard and MIT, enrolling at her local public university. "The strongest foundations are built at home," she said in an interview. For Elena, the victory was the sweetest of all. Arthur offered her a retirement package so generous that she would never have to work again. For the first time in her life, she had time to read, to tend her small garden, to simply sit and watch her daughter change the world. The greatest joy was not in the money, but in the respect she now received. She was no longer a shadow in the halls of a mansion. She was the mother of the woman who taught heaven to a man who thought he owned it. 2 years later, a packed auditorium at an international technology conference. Sophia Alves, now with a degree and several patents to her name, stands on stage. She speaks with a calm and authority that captivates everyone. In the audience, sitting side by side, are Arthur Montenegro and Elena Alves. He, no longer the arrogant boss, but the proud mentor. She, no longer the fearful employee, but the radiant mother. They share no conversation, only a silent understanding, as they observe the woman they both, in different ways, helped to raise. "Talent doesn't live in ivory towers," Sophia concluded, her voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "It flourishes in the concrete of parking lots, in noisy apartments, in the minds of those we're taught to ignore. True genius isn't in having all the answers, but in having the humility to recognize that the most important question may come from the most unexpected voice." His journey had proven a universal and timeless truth. Competence has no social class. Dignity is the strongest armor, and in the end, the light of a single mind shining with courage is enough to dispel the darkest shadow of arrogance and prejudice. Did you enjoy this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us which city you're following us from. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. It's new, and with your help, we'll grow together. Thank you so much for watching.